It takes years of practice and large teams of people to run a race team who then push a car to achieve the best possible lap times. But what if you're like me, a one-person team who just does it all for fun? Well, here's my tips for setting up your car so that you can get the most out of it when at the racetrack. Track driving is something that almost anyone can do. You don't need to be an F1 driver to enjoy a track day. But many of us don't know quite where to start in terms of tyres, suspension, or balance when it comes to dialing in your car's setup for best lap performance. Hello all, my name is BEAVIS, and firstly a quick introduction. I've been enjoying track driving for over 10 years, almost exclusively in Mazda MX-5s, and I've had the opportunity to drive some cars that are of the fastest in their class. However, I'm not a race engineer, I don't work as a professional in the automotive or motorsport industry. I'm just a dude who's done a lot of track driving over the years and spent a lot of time working on and perfecting my own track car. In this video, I'll cover how to set up your car for the track, most importantly, tyres, suspension, stability, and how rain will change your setup, and also some common setup tips. Now, just before we get into the detail, a quick bit of advice. The particular needs of you as a driver and how you set up your car will vary depending on the type of vehicle, the different types of events you attend, along with your specific driving style and skill set. As such, this guide is to be considered as a general baseline and does not take into account every possible circumstance. Sometimes this guide may not have the exact solution for a setup situation. That is just the nature of cars. Don't forget, there is so much more to vehicle setup than just this guide, so please consider this as a stepping stone for your thinking around setup for your car. Nonetheless, feel free to share your feedback via the comments below, and please enjoy. First up, general car setup and suspension intentions. For most drivers, the key aim is to maximize the grip level available at all four tyres. This, in its simplest form, is generally known as mechanical grip. The key components of a car setup that influence mechanical grip are the tyre selection, the tyre temperature, and pressures, and of course wheel camber and toe. Altering these variables are at the immediate control of the driver or engineer and are one of the first methods of adjustment for dialing in your car setup. However, no track is ever just smooth and straight, and as such, the vehicle's suspension helps influence that mechanical grip when the car is loaded due to motion, be it braking, acceleration, or through a turn. This transient nature of handling means that suspension components such as springs, anti-roll bars, and dampers are fundamental to grip and critical in controlling ride, roll, and pitch. This mechanical grip also must be met with balance, in particular front and rear balance, as to influence over or understeer. Front axle grip and rear axle grip may be adjusted independently to suit the intentions of the driver and the balance of the vehicle. The intended or target balance will depend on many factors, including the track, conditions, lap times, tyre life, and so on. Overall, the ideal target is to increase overall grip available at each wheel as best as possible over the full length of a lap, and with the end goal of the fastest possible lap time. Fundamentals of tyres. Your tyres are the only thing in contact with the road surface. As such, it's essential that you manage them to maximize your vehicle's grip and balance during all the key transients of track performance. There are two main variables at work with tyres that influences their performance: the temperature and pressure. Temperature. Aggressive driving increases the heat generated by the tyres, which is as a result of the friction between the rubber and the road surface. As the temperature increases, so too does the pressure. These two variables can influence one another in a cycle. More pressure equals more heat equals more pressure. As such, it is important to 1. Monitor your tyre temperature. 2. Target and maintain a consistent temperature across the face or surface of your tyre. And 3. Avoid severe overheating of the tyre caused by excess pressure or overdriving. Pressure. Similarly, the tyre pressure influences the surface patch in contact with the road and also the stiffness of the tyre and its sidewall. Ideal pressure is perhaps more critical than ideal temperature, insofar as once you have achieved and maintained a perfect pressure, your temperatures are used simply to validate your findings. There is no one ideal pressure. Your target hot pressure of your tyre depends on your vehicle, your weight, the tyre compound, the track and the weather, and even driver preference. A cold tyre will initially be under pressured, but that will also help to bring it up to temperature and pressure more quickly. In general, a cold tyre will build pressure within a lap or two to achieve the ideal hot pressure. Tyre pressures will need to be checked and recorded as quickly as possible after each on-track session when still up to temperature and pressure, and adjusted as necessary. A tyre that is underinflated will allow the sidewalls to flex too much, which can cause muted handling, poor turn-in, and possible damage to the tyre with excess shoulder wear when cornering. A colder temperature on the midpoint surface of the tyre may also be indicative of this situation. A tyre that is overinflated will present excessive tyre wear around the centre of the tyre tread, and a high midpoint surface temperature would indicate this situation. This can also lead to reduced grip levels and a firmer ride. Tyre management. Prior to driving on circuit, you want to set your tyre pressures to approximately 4 psi below the target hot pressure. This way, during the first track session, the tyre temperatures and pressures will increase and ideally end up at the ideal pressure. After the session, check the pressures and adjust your target pressure as mentioned in the segment on pressures above. After each subsequent session, the tyres will begin to maintain a more consistent pressure and require less adjustments. However, continue to check and adjust again if necessary. I'll have a further section following on shortly on how to use tyre pressures to influence vehicle balance and alter understeer and oversteer. Identifying ideal tyre pressures. Knowing where your tyre temperatures and pressures are currently is one thing, but knowing what the ideal pressure is and achieving said ideal pressure is what we are really trying to achieve. This always starts with a baseline pressure for the beginning of your day or event. Your baseline comes from experience. For those amateurs with no prior data on which to gauge a target hot tyre pressure, I'll include a table on the screen here to give you a general guideline on where you can target your tyres, give or take a couple of PSI. Using temperature to achieve ideal pressure. Immediately after each hot track session, when tyres are still at temp, you need to get a datum on each tyre's pressure so that you know where they are at, but importantly you need to record their temperatures so you can read how they are performing at the current pressure. To do so, we need to use a tyre pyrometer. An infrared temperature probe is insufficient in this case. A proper pyrometer probe is the best method for measuring the tyre's workload and temperature status. The probe can be inserted into the tyre to measure the temperature below the surface, where a more accurate reading can be taken. You will need to measure and record 3 temperature readings across the contact surface of each tyre. One reading is taken at the centre of the tyre, and then one reading taken from each of the edges, the outside edge and the inside edge. In an ideal world, there would be a small but consistent or linear variance between each reading, at most around 15 degrees C between the hottest and the coldest. Analysis of the temperature readings can help to indicate whether a change in pressure may be required. Here is a table for a general summary of the results of your temperature and potential remedies. Understeer and oversteer. At this point, you probably already know what understeer and oversteer mean. Understeer is a term to describe a car that won't turn in or that pushes forward and runs wide of a corner, while oversteer is a term to describe a car that turns too much, feels loose or slides out at the rear. Here is a list of setup changes that can be made to alleviate understeer or oversteer as necessary. Car stability and confidence. Instability of a car under any condition can have a significant impact on driver confidence. This can severely hinder lap times purely due to the psychological effects, but also due to the mechanical impact of the unstable car's performance and grip. Usually something is broken to cause the instability, however sometimes it can be caused by setup. Straight line instability can be caused by poor balance in aerodynamic downforce, mechanical faults with the chassis, worn or faulty driveline or transmission components, or potentially excessive toe in or toe out. Braking instabilities can be caused by mechanical faults such as poorly maintained braking systems, excessive bias in one direction, or a damaged or flat-spotted tyre. And poor steering stability can be caused by very excessive aerodynamic downforce, insufficient downforce, or overly stiff suspension geometry, usually caused by overly stiff dampers or excessively inflated tyres. Approaching a wet track. The general school of thought when driving on a wet track is to slightly increase tyre pressures to better resist aquaplaning. Given the likely reduction in the ability for the rubber to gain heat, the increased pressure should also help to compensate for that. Suspension geometry overall can be run in a softer configuration. Springs and dampers, along with the anti-roll bars, can be softened to aid with traction, improve driver control at the limit, make the car more progressive and easier to control. Similarly, as our dry camber and toe settings previously relied on the higher grip to make them more effective, the reduced stiffness in the wet means the same camber levels at lower grip levels may still be appropriate. Wet tracks obviously reduce grip levels. This most significantly impacts braking and cornering, but less so acceleration. As such, top speeds are not reduced as much as braking distance will increase. Brake bias will be altered as forward weight transfer will be less prevalent in the range. More rearward braking should be used to compensate for this. Avoid water ingress by blocking off ducts, particularly those that may feed the driver. Wet weather usually also means colder temperatures. You can usually block off some of the front-facing vents or openings for radiators to improve aero efficiency and reduce the chance of overcooling. Consider ways to keep the cabin and engine bay clean and dry. Mop up excess water after each on-track session and wipe the driver footwell of water that the driver may have brought in. A clean windscreen and visor are critical where a wet track can compromise visibility. Give everything a good clean. Critical components that you want to be sure will not get wet include your electrical components and engine computer, and the intake air system feeding your engine. Common setup mistakes. Amateur drivers can often get caught into the trap of making ill-informed setup changes to their vehicle in the endless chase of faster lap times and better car balance. Here is a list of the more common setup mistakes for you to keep in mind. The most common and the most significant mistake a driver can make is not properly monitoring the tyres, or failing to make observations on how the tyres are performing based on the data available. It is one of the key indicators as to what is happening with the car. Regular tyre temperature and pressure readings throughout the day are very important. Don't forget my tyre section previously mentioned. Mystery suspension. Many people know what coilovers they are running, but may not know their spring rates, their anti-roll bar rates, or their chassis stiffness. Without really knowing your car, how can you make educated judgments on the handling or setup changes that you need to make? Excessive setup changes. Changes to the vehicle's setup or geometry must come with a plan, and most cases involve one change at a time. A common mistake for less experienced drivers is to make too many changes all at once without understanding how each one may affect the vehicle's characteristics. Think a mindset of, if I change X, I should see result Y. Making one change at a time is advisable to best evaluate the impact of that change. And finally, tunnel vision. Not every handling or balance characteristic is caused by one adjustment. Some symptoms may have multiple causes, and sometimes multiple components compound a symptom. Sometimes multiple issues can occur and interfere with one another. Don't overly focus on one component to remedy a single issue. If you aren't seeing an improvement or a change, then consider alternative changes that may also come into play. For example, spending a day playing with damper stiffness to remedy an oversteer issue when in fact your tyres are overheating or overpressured. Well folks, that's been my track car setup guide for track days. I hope it's been of value to you. If you think I've missed anything, of course I highly encourage you to leave a comment below for your fellow viewers. I'm sure we can build this out to be something that is very valuable to those of us who attend track days on a regular basis. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ta.